Good morning, everyone. Brett Kavanaugh speaking from my chambers on what might be the last peaceful morning in the Middle East for a very long time. So I'm sitting here with my morning coffee, Ethiopian, ironically, from a region that could be directly affected by what I'm about to tell you, when I realize I need to share something with the American people that I learned yesterday in the most classified military briefing I've ever received as a Supreme Court justice. We're not just looking at potential military action against Iran. According to Pentagon documents I've reviewed, Israeli intelligence reports I've been briefed on, and direct conversations with Defense Department officials, we're looking at a comprehensive 90-day military campaign designed to permanently eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities and regime infrastructure. And folks, this isn't contingency planning anymore. This is an operational timeline that's already been activated. The Pentagon War Room briefing. 3 days ago, I received an unprecedented request from the Secretary of Defense to attend what they called a judicial war powers consultation at the Pentagon. These consultations are extremely rare, usually only called when military operations raise serious constitutional questions about executive authority versus congressional war powers. I arrive at the Pentagon to find myself in a secure briefing room with the Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Director of Central Intelligence, and several officials from U.S. Central Command and Special Operations Command. Justice Kavanaugh, the Secretary begins. We need to discuss the constitutional implications of comprehensive military action against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure. What they show me over the next 4 hours is the most detailed military operation plan I've ever seen. We're not talking about limited airstrikes or targeted sanctions. We're talking about a systematic destruction campaign designed to eliminate Iran's nuclear program, decapitate its military leadership, and collapse its ability to project power throughout the region. The operational name, the CENTCOM commander explains, is Operation Persian Freedom, a 90-day campaign with 3 distinct phases designed to achieve what diplomacy and sanctions have failed to accomplish. Sure, the 90-day timeline. The Pentagon timeline they showed me is both comprehensive and terrifying. Days 1 to 30, air superiority and nuclear elimination. Coordinated strikes on Iran's air defense systems, destruction of nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordo, Isfahan, and Iraq, targeting of uranium enrichment centrifuges and plutonium production, elimination of nuclear scientists and research facilities, days 31-60, military decapitation, strikes on IRGC command and control centers, destruction of ballistic missile manufacturing facilities, targeting of naval bases and naval vessels in Persian Gulf, elimination of drone and cyber warfare capabilities, days 61-90, regime infrastructure collapse, strikes on government buildings and communication centers, targeting of oil and gas infrastructure, destruction of transportation and logistics networks, support for internal opposition groups. The goal, the Pentagon official explains, is not regime change per se, but regime capability elimination. Iran will survive as a country, but not as a regional power. The Israeli coordination. What really opened my eyes was learning about the extent of U.S.-Israeli military coordination for the Iran operation. The CIA director explained that Israeli intelligence has been providing real-time intelligence on Iranian nuclear facilities, military installations, and leadership locations for over 2 years. Operation Persian Freedom, he notes, is essentially a joint U.S.-Israeli operation disguised as American unilateral action. He shows me intelligence assessments proving that Israeli F-35 fighters will participate in strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, Israeli submarines will target Iranian naval assets in the Persian Gulf, and Israeli cyber units will coordinate electronic warfare against Iranian command systems. The coordination, he continues, is so comprehensive that distinguishing between American and Israeli operations will be impossible. But here's what really disturbs me. Israeli intelligence is also providing target lists for Iranian scientists, IRGC commanders, and political leaders. We're not just talking about military infrastructure. We're talking about targeted elimination of Iranian human assets. Mwanarbs, the constitutional crisis. As the briefing continued, I started asking the obvious constitutional questions that apparently no one else in the room wanted to address. Mr. Secretary, I say, does Operation Persian Freedom require congressional authorization under the War Powers Resolution? The Secretary's answer chills me. The President has determined that Iranian nuclear development constitutes an imminent threat to American national security, giving him constitutional authority to act without prior congressional approval. But, I continue, a 90-day systematic military campaign goes far beyond responding to imminent threats. This is a war of choice, not a war of necessity. The Joint Chiefs Chairman interrupts. Justice Kavanaugh, with respect, constitutional law is subordinate to operational necessity when American security is threatened. This is exactly the kind of thinking that the founders designed constitutional government to prevent. Military officials claiming that constitutional constraints don't apply during security crises. The regional escalation scenarios. The Pentagon briefing also included detailed assessments of how Iran would likely respond to American-Israeli strikes, and the scenarios are genuinely terrifying. Iran cannot respond directly to American military action, the CENTCOM commander explains, but Iran can escalate through proxy forces throughout the region. The scenarios they've wargamed include Hezbollah launching thousands of missiles at Israeli cities, Iranian proxies attacking American bases in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf, closure of the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off 20% of global oil supply, terrorist attacks against American targets worldwide, cyber warfare against American infrastructure. The assessment, the CIA director notes, is that Operation Persian Freedom will trigger regional war involving Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and potentially Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. But here's the most disturbing part. Regional escalation is considered an acceptable outcome because it would justify permanent American military presence throughout the Middle East. And the economic warfare component. During the briefing, the Treasury Department representative explained something that really opened my eyes. The economic aspects of the Iran war plan. Operation Persian Freedom, he explains, isn't just military action. It's comprehensive economic warfare designed to collapse Iran's ability to finance regional activities. The economic plan includes destruction of Iranian oil production and export facilities, targeting of Iranian banking and financial infrastructure, sanctions on any country that provides economic support to Iran, seizure of Iranian assets held in international financial institutions. The goal, he continues, is to reduce Iranian GDP by 60 to 80% and create economic conditions that force internal political change. But the global economic implications are staggering. Removing Iranian oil from global markets, he notes, will increase oil prices by 40–60% and could trigger worldwide recession. The congressional briefing I attended. Yesterday, I attended a classified congressional briefing where House and Senate leaders were informed about Operation Persian Freedom. What I witnessed there was deeply disturbing from a constitutional perspective. The Pentagon briefers essentially presented the Iran operation as a fait accompli rather than a proposal requiring congressional approval. Congressional leaders, the Secretary told me afterward, were informed of presidential decisions rather than consulted about presidential options. The few members of Congress who raised constitutional questions about war powers were told that operational security required presidential discretion rather than congressional deliberation. But here's what really bothered me. Several members of Congress seemed relieved that they wouldn't have to vote on authorization for military action against Iran. They want the political benefits of supporting military action. one senior official told me, without the political risks of authorizing military action. The Supreme Court war powers cases. What most Americans don't know is that we already have several war powers cases pending before the Supreme Court that will determine whether presidential military authority can override constitutional requirements for congressional authorization. The Iran operation will almost certainly trigger new constitutional challenges about the scope of presidential war powers, the definition of imminent threats, and the duration of military action that doesn't require congressional approval. My colleagues and I will likely be deciding whether the Constitution allows presidents to initiate major military campaigns without congressional authorization based on claims of national security necessity. These aren't abstract legal questions anymore. These are immediate constitutional crises that will determine whether America maintains constitutional constraints on presidential war powers. Diras, the intelligence assessment. The CIA briefing included intelligence assessments that really changed how I understand the Iranian threat and American motivations for military action. Iranian nuclear development, the CIA director explains, has advanced beyond what we've disclosed publicly. Iran is approximately 6 to 8 weeks away from weapons-grade uranium production. Moreover, he continues, Iranian ballistic missile capabilities now allow them to target American bases throughout the region and potentially reach European allies. But here's what really got my attention. Iranian cyber capabilities have penetrated American infrastructure systems, including power grids, water supplies, and financial networks. The intelligence case for military action is much stronger than public reporting suggests. But the intelligence case for 90-day comprehensive military action versus limited targeted strikes is much weaker. Chakrabarti, the conversation with Senator Cotton. Yesterday evening, I had dinner with Senator Tom Cotton, one of the most knowledgeable members of Congress on national security issues. What he told me about congressional attitudes toward Iran military action was revealing. Brett, he says to me, there's strong bipartisan support for military action against Iranian nuclear facilities. Democrats don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons any more than Republicans do. But, he continues, there's much less support for comprehensive military action designed to collapse Iranian regional influence. Cotton explains that Congress would likely authorize limited strikes on nuclear facilities, but would oppose systematic military action designed to eliminate Iran as a regional power. The constitutional problem, he notes, is that the president is planning comprehensive action that exceeds congressional willingness to authorize, so he's claiming constitutional authority to act without congressional approval. The oil market implications. During the Treasury briefing, I learned about something that most Americans don't understand: how Iran military action would affect global energy markets and American economic interests. Iran produces about 3 million barrels of oil per day, the Treasury official explains, but Iran also has the capability to disrupt an additional 15-20 million barrels per day of oil production throughout the Gulf region. Operation Persian Freedom, he continues, could remove 20 to 25% of global oil production from international markets, triggering oil prices of $200 to $300 per barrel. The economic impact on American consumers would be devastating. Gasoline prices of $8 to $12 per gallon, heating oil shortages, trucking and shipping cost explosions, and general inflation that could exceed 20-30% annually. But, the official notes, American domestic oil production would benefit enormously from higher global oil prices. The economic winners and losers from Iran military action don't align with American national interests as much as they align with specific American economic sectors. Chakras, the Israeli factor. The extent of Israeli influence on American Iran policy became clear during my Pentagon briefing, and it raises serious questions about whether American military action serves American interests or Israeli interests. Israeli intelligence, the CIA director explains, provides 70-80% of actionable intelligence on Iranian nuclear and military activities. Israeli technological capabilities, the Pentagon official adds, are essential for successful strikes on hardened Iranian nuclear facilities. But here's the concerning part. Israeli strategic objectives regarding Iran go beyond nuclear weapons prevention to include elimination of Iranian regional influence. American military action that serves Israeli strategic objectives might not serve American strategic objectives, but the operational coordination makes distinguishing between the two impossible. The domestic political calculations. During my conversations with congressional leaders and Pentagon officials, it became clear that domestic political considerations are influencing military planning in ways that concern me constitutionally. Iran military action, one congressional leader told me, would demonstrate American strength and presidential leadership in ways that benefit both parties politically. Democrats, he continues, can support military action as defense of American allies and international law. Republicans can support military action as demonstration of American military superiority. But military action designed to serve domestic political interests rather than strategic national interests violates the constitutional principle that military power should serve national defense rather than political advantage. There's the timeline pressure. What really disturbs me about the Iran operation timeline is that it seems driven more by political considerations than strategic necessities. The 90-day timeline, one Pentagon official admitted to me privately, is designed to complete major military action before congressional opposition can organize effectively. Moreover, he continues, the timeline is designed to present Iran and the international community with fait accompli rather than opportunities for diplomatic resolution. Constitutional government requires deliberation rather than predetermined action, but the Iran operation timeline eliminates opportunities for constitutional deliberation. The international law questions. The Pentagon briefing also addressed something that will definitely come before the Supreme Court: whether Operation Persian Freedom violates international law in ways that create constitutional problems for American officials. Preemptive military action, the State Department legal advisor explains, requires demonstrating imminent threats that cannot be addressed through non-military means. The Iran operation, he continues, involves preemptive strikes based on potential future threats rather than imminent current threats. International law violations by American officials can create constitutional accountability issues that the Supreme Court will have to address. The nuclear escalation risk. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Iran briefing was the discussion of nuclear escalation scenarios. Iran doesn't currently have nuclear weapons, the Pentagon official explains, but Iran has significant radiological materials that could be weaponized during military action. Moreover, he continues, Iranian allies, including Russia and China, have nuclear capabilities that could be activated if they perceive American-Israeli action as threatening their strategic interests. The nuclear escalation scenarios they've modeled include Russian nuclear threats against American allies, Chinese nuclear threats in the Pacific, and Iranian radiological attacks against American forces in the region. The assessment, the official concludes, is that nuclear escalation risks are manageable but not eliminable. Constitutional government shouldn't accept manageable nuclear escalation risks based on presidential determinations alone. My constitutional analysis. As a Supreme Court justice who has sworn to uphold the Constitution, I have serious concerns about Operation Persian Freedom's constitutional foundation. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, not the President the power to initiate war based on claims of imminent threats that extend over 90-day periods. Military action that involves systematic destruction of another country's infrastructure, targeting of political and military leadership, and coordination with foreign military forces constitutes war under any reasonable constitutional interpretation Presidential authority to respond to imminent threats doesn't include authority to initiate comprehensive military campaigns designed to eliminate other countries' regional influence. The Supreme Court's dilemma: if Operation Persian Freedom proceeds as planned, the Supreme Court will face the most serious war powers constitutional case in American history. We'll have to decide whether presidents can initiate major military campaigns without congressional authorization based on claims of national security necessity. We'll have to determine whether coordination with foreign military forces requires congressional approval under treaty-making powers. We'll have to rule on whether economic and political considerations can justify military action that exceeds immediate defensive necessities. These constitutional questions will determine whether America maintains constitutional constraints on presidential military power or allows presidential discretion based on national security claims. What this means for America. Operation Persian Freedom will fundamentally change America's Middle East position, global strategic relationships, and constitutional balance between executive and legislative war powers. If successful, it will eliminate Iranian nuclear capabilities and regional influence while establishing permanent American military dominance throughout the Middle East. If unsuccessful, it could trigger regional war, global economic crisis, and potential nuclear escalation involving multiple countries. But regardless of strategic outcomes, it will establish precedents for presidential military authority that exceed clear constitutional constraints on war-making power. The choice. We're not making. What disturbs me most about Operation Persian Freedom is that the American people aren't being given a choice about whether to go to war with Iran. Constitutional government requires democratic deliberation about major military action, but the Iran operation is being planned and implemented through executive decision-making without public debate or congressional authorization. By the time most Americans understand what's happening, military action will already be underway and impossible to stop without accepting strategic and political defeat. Looking toward war. As I sit here in my Supreme Court chambers reviewing war powers, jurisprudence, and constitutional military authority precedents, I'm convinced that Operation Persian Freedom represents the most serious constitutional crisis regarding military power in modern American history. The president has clear authority to defend against attacks on American interests, but comprehensive military action designed to eliminate other countries' regional influence exceeds defensive authority and requires congressional authorization. The question isn't whether Iran poses threats to American interests. It clearly does. The question is whether American constitutional government can survive presidents claiming unlimited military authority based on national security necessities. Thanks for listening, folks. This was the most difficult conversation I've ever had to have about constitutional government and military power. Next week, we'll discuss the war powers cases that will come before the Supreme Court once military action begins. Until then, remember that constitutional government requires democratic control over military power, not military action based on presidential discretion alone.